Hello and welcome to the Embracing the Mystery podcast, hosted by yours truly, Danny Rem. This is a podcast where we have expansive conversations around living an empowered and embodied soul-led life, expanding your consciousness and belief systems, what it means to fully embrace the mystery of life that we are all living, and so much more. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a rating or review wherever you listen. Share it on your social media platforms, like and subscribe. Thank you for being here and enjoy. Hello, beautiful human beings, and welcome to the first episode of the Embracing the Mystery podcast. In this first episode, I interviewed my dear, dear sister, Elisabeth Dreshaj, who just went on a peace pilgrimage across the country. She biked 3,000 plus miles across the southern tier of the United States, promoting peace and feeding people, handing out chai, giving people clothes and blankets who were in need in places where it was really cold. And she just went on the most incredible journey. So, we are talking about that today. We get to hear about her inspirations, the challenges, the miracles that she experienced. We also have conversations about how to cultivate inner peace and actually how both of our recent spiritual pilgrimages forced us to develop deep faith and trust far beyond what we knew before. Welcome, Elisabeth, to Embracing the Mystery podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Danny, for having me.
Yes, it's so sweet to see you and hear your voice. And I know that you just went on a super expansive and probably profound spiritual pilgrimage, biking like 3,000 miles plus for peace across the country. And yeah, we want to hear all about it, your inspirations, what happened in your journey, the miraculous things, the challenging things. So please share with us.
Oh, yeah, there was so much that could be said about it. I've said this many times, is that the days felt like years and the months like days. And the first day, I was completely exhausted and depleted and dehydrated and just calling friends saying, I'm done. I can't do this for 3 months. And a friend of mine offered me some advice that honestly became my mantra for the entire journey, which was instead of thinking about 3 months of an experience, think of it as one day at a time and just ask yourself each day, do I want to bike today? And if yes, then keep going. And if no, just know that you've done so good. And so from that moment on, that's how I was able to really, I think, make it across the country, was just asking myself each day, do I want to bike today? And even after the first day, which was so hard, I had a few other days that were like very memorable on how hard they were. And even on those days, I still, maybe it took me the night to sleep and then wake up in the morning and I'd ask myself, like, do I want to keep going? And the answer was just always yes. So,
Wow, I
yeah.
love that. Yeah, and that's such an important mantra to have just in our daily life, like one thing at a time, one step at a time, like each moment at a time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it totally, I feel like has changed my life, is just that perspective. And now things that feel like so hard to accomplish or almost even impossible, it's just one, like you said, just one step at a time.
And you were pedaling for peace.
Yeah.
So how did the intention of pedaling for peace, like how did you weave that in? How did you share that with the world?
It was honestly so profound and one of my favorite things about this entire experience. Um, I love that question. Thanks, Danny. The way that you articulated it was perfect. I had the initial dream to walk across the country, and this is 5 years ago. I had been living in Central America, working with rescued wildlife, and basically I moved back to New Hampshire for the summer. And in that summer, I had this profound experience with realizing the source of love, which comes from within each of us. And I was so inspired. I wanted to walk around the country telling everybody, like, you're not your mind. You are infinite in the source of love and peace, and it's from within you. And so that's like where it came from, because no one had ever spoken to me about the idea of thoughts, except for in this one college class that I had about, it was about personal development, I think. And in the book, our textbook talked about the inner critic. And I had never heard this concept in my life before. And then I remember that summer I was in New Hampshire and I was like, I need to get this college book because it was talking about something that I'm experiencing right now. And actually I was listening to The Power of Now just randomly, and that book set me free in listening to it. And Eckhart Tolle talking about the idea of thoughts in the mind, which had never been introduced to me before. And I think, and so that's really where it came from, was this inspiration to tell everyone, like, you're not just your mind and this inner critic. And we're so much more than that. And we're actually the creators of it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that has now evolved over 5 years. And for years and years and years, I've been doing art in many forms on the streets, and whether that's with plastic that we picked up in cleanups, or street church where we play music and give people food, making
Street
huge,
church.
yes,
I miss
making
it.
huge band, me too. But the pilgrimage was an extension of street church for sure. Like, life is always preparing us for things that we don't know. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
knowing, like, just that, even just the idea of that, it kind of makes everything a little bit more exciting, because it's like just to be here in the present moment more fully, recognizing that it could potentially be, it is preparing us for whatever's to come in the future. And so, yeah, like I said, I could talk about this. So to get to your question though, is that um, over the years, I was talking about this dream to friends and people, and one of my very good friends and spiritual teachers, she asked me, when I was telling her I want to walk across the country and never tell everyone about love and peace, and she was like, do you know Peace Pilgrim? And I was like, no, I have no idea who that is. And she was a woman who existed in the 50s, and she spent the rest of her life walking for peace.
Mm.
And so I watched her documentary, and then I could not watch it again until I was ready to actually do this myself, because her soul and her story just resonated so deeply with my own, and just set me on fire, that I was like, I can't watch this until I'm ready. And but she did inspire me to print a tunic, and which is a t-shirt that says Peace Pilgrim on the front, and on the back of it, for me, it says pedaling 3,000 miles for peace. And this was the best idea that I made in doing this pilgrimage, because it allowed for people to come up to me every single day, everywhere I go, all the time. People take my picture, come up to me crying, thanking me,
Oh.
asking me what I'm doing. It was just really profound. And then there was the two of us at one point, and we're both just embodying Peace Pilgrim and both wearing jerseys, and the effect that that had, I don't even I don't even know, honestly. Yeah, I pray that it, that I will know one day, but right now it's just trusting that it really did make an impact on people's day-to-day lives who got to just witness us in this pilgrimage.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, I feel like when we do these sorts of things, we probably touch so many more people than we even realize, you know?
Yeah, that really actually reminds me of what we were talking about before, is just in an earlier conversation between you and me, is that releasing of expectation. Like, when you do something, it's like you don't have an expectation to know right away the effect of it. You just got to stay in love.
Yeah, I'm so curious about if you had any expectations or like if you had a specific plan. Obviously, you had some sort of plan, but how did that actually, play out? Or was it more of you just like surrendering day to day, like you were sharing about like tuning in? Like, how was that for you?
Oh my goodness. Um, yes, I had a plan, and very quickly I learned that there's a greater plan. And so instead of trying to figure it out in my own way, I just surrendered to the greater plan. And um, that really allowed for this pilgrimage to be what it was meant to be. Instead of thinking that it needed to be some way or timelines or this is the amount of time I'm supposed to be in this place and I have to get to this next place, it was just allowed for more fluidity throughout the pilgrimage. And I think that that also, that surrenderance allowed for there to be more spaciousness for miracles to unfold. Because if I was like, oh, I need to get to here and didn't allow myself like an extra 15 minutes at a coffee shop or something in the morning, then perhaps I wouldn't have met that person who I end up having an hour-long conversation for. And if I didn't have space for that hour-long conversation because I'm trying to get somewhere else, it's like it just wouldn't have worked out the same. So I really had to surrender my own plan and just be open to the the higher plan.
Hmm.
And and at the same time, there is some planning that goes along with it because we're biking, and so you have to like think like, okay, I have to bike 60 miles today, and you, there needs to be some idea of like, okay, I can have the morning till around 11 o'clock, and then at that point, like I do need to start biking a little bit. But even then, there was one day where we were biking and we were gonna go like 20 or 30 more miles to go stay at a host house. But we were like so enjoying where we were at that we decided to just not even go to the host house and just go back to the host that we had just been staying with and just stay with them for another night. So there
Hmm.
was some days where it was like, even if we had an idea of like, okay, we're going to bike this far and this is where we're going to stay, like even that changed too. So, and then I made a website for this pilgrimage just to give everyone all the details so that I didn't have to explain myself 10 million times. And, and, if you, I have revised it, but there's some things that I've left. But in the beginning, I had like these ideas of just what I wanted to do while I was out in the world. And my instructions completely changed at one point when I was riding through the desert. I feel like God just pinged my heart and said to me, focus on staying hydrated, nourishing yourself, and staying in love, and
Mm.
everything else will fall into place. And so instead of like thinking that I needed to create this event here or do this thing, and things did happen. We did have events or spontaneous efforts in the world of just showing up in places that we were in, but not trying to like do that too far in the future and just allow that spaciousness was really important.
Yeah, I love that you're speaking to the concept of like surrender and spaciousness and like allowing that spaciousness so the guidance and the miracles can come in. And yeah, I feel like that's so important in our daily lives. And also like the rest that you're speaking to, because it's like sometimes we can't really show up in service the way we want to unless we are also like taking care of ourselves. And that has to be such a priority too,
Oh yeah.
especially when you're biking in the desert.
It's essential. It's like we
Yeah.
want to keep moving and like do everything, and power to us, that's awesome, but it's not realistic. Like, and I think that that's like the balance of like the yin and yang, the spiritual and the physical, the higher self and the human self. Like there's just these the like just finding the balance between it is really, I feel like the key to inner peace within ourselves.
Yeah, can you speak a little more about like finding inner peace? Because I know that like so much is happening on our planet right now, and so much is being revealed to us about, where the consciousness is at in certain areas of the world and where we're really at, in our own hearts. And I'm curious if you have anything to say about integrating inner peace and what that looks like and how to share that with the world in the way that you did.
Yeah. Uh, I truly feel like that developing a relationship with oneself to prioritize peace and compassion towards the self is some of the best work that we can do for the world. Like, and to be okay with that. And that's a really hard thing because there's activists and there's so many passionate people who are so amazing and want to help and save everyone. But at the end of it just can create like an imbalance again, and even if it's coming from a place of absolute love, I feel like tending to our minds is very important. And so our mental health is so important. And if we're in the world and we are expecting outer peace, but there's no inner peace, it's just doesn't even, it's just not going to really happen. And so we have to, if we really want that outer peace, we have to accept our duty to create peace within ourselves. And really, it's a gift that we then can give in all the interactions that we have and every day and the people that we meet and just being able to just breathe, through our nose and consciously or through our mouths and consciously and cultivate this space within us that is pure peace, pure presence. And that has an effect on our world. And it's like what we just said, like and doing anything and creating anything, and we don't know the ripples of the effect right away. But I love the idea of just in our day-to-day, because either way we're living our day-to-day lives. So even if you're trying to create peace in Sudan, it's like you and you're not creating peace in your present moment of where you're at. Like it just it's just that's just not
Hmm.
sustainable. And it so really it's about recognizing that the small interactions, the day to day, and how each day will evolve into 3 months later. And you don't even know in 3 months from now or 3 years that by focusing on the day to day and the present moment of where we're at, how that can actually create an effect in our world. And say there's somebody who's like a diplomat that's really upset and just has all these vendettas, but then you have this sweet interaction with them randomly. You don't know who they are, but you choose to open the door for them at a cafe and just smile, look at them into their eyes and tell them to have a beautiful day. Like you
Hmm.
don't we can't underestimate small acts of kindness in our world that create, we don't know, because then that person is now has been touched by another a peaceful and friendly and loving way, and then perhaps now they're inspired to go and share that with others. So it's kind of like a social experiment because we don't really know, and all we can do is just is pray that by living from this place of um pure intention and of inner peace, that will eventually that will create outer peace.
Hmm.
And I was very mindful because the peace has been like something that people have talked about. In the 60s, it was a huge thing with Vietnam War and just so much that was going on in our world. And I didn't want people to associate me with being a hippie, just like another hippie going for peace again. And I was very, very cautious about this because I like didn't want people to just write me off.
Right.
Um and I had so many conversations with people who maybe wouldn't normally associate with a like a hippie.
Hmm.
Um and we were able to just meet each other on this level of just an awareness of being human, not not hippie. It's just a human meeting another human. And really my message of peace is cultivating inner peace. And I pray and believe that when we all do that in our own individual lives and in our experiences, that's what will create the exterior peace. And it's a hard thing to say because people could, judge you because they have an expectation of what others need to do in order to create peace in the world. But
Hmm.
it's like we have to just give ourselves, that's where the compassion comes in, is like and you just know, like Jesus said, know thyself, know that you're doing the best that you can, and you're doing great. and and that goes back to the mental, just that awareness of the mental health, is that you don't need to get too much in your mind and thinking that you're not doing enough for the world. Like just you existing is enough for the world.
Yes, I love that so much. And thank you for speaking to all of this. And that really resonates. And I see so many of us as these like seeds of remembrance. And it's like you're saying, it's like that embodying the inner peace or embodying like joy or kindness, even if there's not necessarily like an action behind it, just being in that energy and meeting people with that, it welcomes them into it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. We are truly gifted to have this lesson that's being brought to our awareness and our attention at whatever time in our lives, not just you and I, but whoever else is watching this, in whatever time in our lives. This is what we call wisdom. And elders, they go throughout their lives to and then teach us this wisdom to not just live for yourself, but live to love each other as well, and recognize that if I plant a tree and I die tomorrow, at least the others get to reap the fruit of that tree. And sometimes that tree is the form of planting a seed of love in another being, and recognizing that that's a gift that we can all give to the world.
So beautiful. Yeah, and such a perfect metaphor of the tree. It's so true. It's like what are we really choosing to bring into the world from our heart and just through who we are.
Yeah, and there's no pressure. Like I think that I think art has so many different avenues, and it's the same way of like all the paths that um, there's many paths to God, and it's all going to the same space ultimately. That's a whole nother conversation, but art is the same way. And I think that instead of spending our precious time and energy on judging somebody else, it's like it instead maybe perhaps we could just focus on what we want to bring into the world, and just get totally centered and stoked on that, and then give everybody the opportunity to freely express, and
Mm-hmm.
just yeah, because there it doesn't have to look one way in order to, you can be nice and also have a bad, or like, and you could also have a bad day, and there's no
Hmm.
pressure that you need to always show up. I think that's ultimately what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And trusting that even if we feel like we are having a bad day or we're not fully at peace within ourselves, that that's also serving a purpose for our own evolution or, those around us or whatever it is that we're going through. It's all woven together.
Yeah, it's so valid and allowed.
Yes.
And like you said, it it's honestly a gift when we can just breathe through it, watch our minds through it, and just show up, go for a walk or whatever it is that we need to do to stay centered in ourselves and in this life experience. Because there is a lot going on in our world, and not just in the outer world, but in like our individual experiences as well, in interpersonal relationships and everything and all the dynamics. And so I think as a peace pilgrim in this world and overall and throughout this pilgrimage, the I think the focus is really about just that day to day and just really just choosing to be a good person in each day that
Mm-hmm.
we're gifted to be able to live, really.
Right. I totally agree. I want to shift our focus for a moment because within this, what is being birthed through me, embracing the mystery, which is also what I'm living, what we're all living. I love to hear about the moments in time where faith has to be developed. And you're talking about maybe you have a bad day, but you're still kind. I'm just curious, were there any moments of intense challenges that required you to just really anchor into that place of peace and like develop greater faith and like give spaciousness to the miracles? Like, what did that look like on your journey?
There were many times where it was so fascinating. Didn't, when I took off on this journey, like I said, I had an agenda almost. I didn't know what would really come up for me. And as I was riding by myself, I did the first 700 miles by myself. And um, the thing that kept coming up for me is that, oh,
As we're on the topic of things maybe not going the way we expected.
That's so funny. Um, but it's just being mindful. And yeah, you just can't really plan for everything in life. And basically, there were times the biggest challenge I found was myself in
Wow.
in this experience is that it the challenge was that I had fear in my mind about, this is scary. I'm in the middle of nowhere. Like, what do I do? The weather, it says that it's going to thunderstorm. It looks like there's thunderstorms on the way, and just so many different moving parts. But ultimately, I had to just really teach myself, like, watch the mind and come into the present moment and ask myself, what is happening here?
Mm.
And and 10 times out of 10, it was totally fine. It was just more of like this internal fear coming up for me of like the what ifs and what could happen. And so that was something I definitely had to overcome and the unknown of the experience and just like and having faith that like somehow even if it did start raining, I would be provided
Mm.
a resource. Like one day I actually biked it was like 106 miles. This is the longest day I biked, and I have batteries for my bike, and I was like going through this very mountainous part. It's like pretty hard biking in general, even without a pedal assist bike. And I had no idea. I was like 20 miles away from like the closest town on my GPS, but I had to keep my battery on because it was just impossible to keep riding otherwise. And I just said to God, like, I don't know how I'll be able to charge my battery, but I just trust that there'll be a way that's provided. And I just had to send it and just keep going. And then like 5 miles later, there was um abandoned like checkpoint station or something in the desert. And I rolled up there and there was power still in the building. And so I was able to just stay there and charge my batteries. And it was just moments like this where I just had to completely surrender any any knowing of how something would work out and just pray that it did and just keep going. And every single time I was in a situation like that, it worked out.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really wild, actually.
I love what you just said about like trusting and knowing what you need and then kind of like letting go of the how it's gonna happen. That's something I also just traveled for many months, and that was something that I really had to practice too, like just like letting go of the how. Like knowing that somehow it's gonna work out, even if we don't know how or we can't see how, like just like fully trusting in that and opening to the solution to be provided rather than like getting stuck in that fear.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you can totally relate because you were in a completely other country too.
Yeah, yeah, it was so interesting. Like I can relate to what you're saying about like the fears that come up and your biggest challenge being yourself, because when you're in a new environment, like especially another country where people speak another language, it's an opportunity to, yeah, just like witness those things and fully embrace what's in front of you, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, with talking about faith that things are going to work out and surrendering into that trust, I'm curious if this was like a big leap of faith for you, because I know before you and I were both living on Maui and we're kind of in a bubble there, in this like super magical rainbow crystalline land. And so to like come out of that can be a bit shocking. And I'm curious if that was something you had to overcome and how that was.
Yeah, it was a lot of faith. Absolutely. Of like it it didn't really hit me until the night before I left. And then I was literally there's about 10 people who were there that witnessed this, but I was literally on the floor like with one of my spiritual teachers just crying at her feet like I don't know why I need to do this and why I'm leaving my home and my life and just like all of this fear was coming up for me in that moment of like I'm leaving tomorrow and but I just did it. I had to go because otherwise I would just knew that if I didn't go that I would be continuously thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, as you're sharing this, I'm flashing back to a memory that something that happened in Maui right before I left, and I think it was my last. So for those of you who don't know, Elizabeth and I used to live on Maui, and we spent a lot of time at the Ram Dass house together, just in different practices, meditation, kirtan, chanting, seva, and it was such a safe space and sanctuary for me. It's like one of my favorite places in the whole world. And I remember I was going to leave for Peru, and it was like my last kirtan, my last Sunday there, and I started sobbing. And you came up to me and you held me and you looked at me and you said, Hanuman is in your heart wherever you go. And that stuck with me so deeply. And I also feel like that's also what you just brought out to the world. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's kind of how I see it.
Wow, yeah. It's like I guess I had to discover that for myself too.
Yeah.
And it's the truth.
Aw.
I have successfully discovered that.
Yeah, because it can be so challenging to leave our comfort zone, to leave like our friends or our family or our communities. But there's also like can be this greater call within our hearts or our spirit, or we're being guided, to different places in the world for different reasons. And we really have to trust that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's like you gotta, I think that's where like the growth happens. And the
Hmm.
growth happens in all different ways, but if we want like some exponential growth or like to like take an
Head
expedition
all
of the
across the
soul,
country.
yeah, definitely. Or like send it to South America. There's just so many different ways. There's so many different ways to that will lead you to that place of discovering peace within yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and what an interesting concept too, because I think, it's easy maybe or easier perhaps to have peace when we are in our comfort zone and we have things the way we like them and we have the foods we want to eat and different things, but like to really cultivate this space of peace in the heart no matter like what is happening externally. Like I feel like you kind of have to put yourself in those situations and like meet those edges of discomfort.
Yeah. I mean, you just brought up the Ram Dass's house. And so, in the words of Ram Dass, it's like if you think you're enlightened, go home and spend a week with your family, you
Oh,
know?
yeah. That's what I'm doing
And
right now.
yeah, yeah, I know. And I knew you would say that or relate to it, but
So true.
it's just it's the truth. Like if you think that that is the truth for yourself, then like go and just put yourself in a space where like it's out of your comfort zone and see how you feel. And
Mhm.
then question like, where is that coming from within myself when I felt like, and it's okay to have, I have creature comforts and like I love my socks and chilling in bed with a book and tea. Like I get it. And but at the same time, like it's nice to be able to expand ourselves out of that comfort because if it didn't exist, like where would we be? And so
Mhm.
really in that question, it's like, do we know ourselves beyond the comfort? Like, can we still know where the peace is at, even
Hmm.
if things are uncomfortable? Because sometimes, like, life throws a wrench, like, and if it needs to be one way for yourself in order for you to be peaceful, I think that like we'd find out very
Mhm.
quickly that we're not actually peaceful.
Right. 100%. Yeah. And I'm curious what you would suggest to people if someone's listening to this and they're like going through something super challenging, like maybe like a divorce or something financial or losing a family member. Like, what would you share with them about cultivating that or how to be with that? Or what have you found about
Deep,
being with
deep
that?
breaths.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Danny is an amazing breathwork coach and friend and practitioner, and I too have a pranayama practice in my daily life, and I feel like cultivating that has been a gift, and it's free. It's something that we all have, literally, and we're and we can establish that in that relationship within ourselves just through our breath.
Mm,
And so that is one thing. And another thing is, you know, those things when they come up, they can be very difficult. And for example, if we haven't cultivated practices or have healthy habits that can support us in those moments, like we could go down a slippery slope, which is real for so
mm,
many. And
mm,
it seems easier, but in the long run, can it can create more hardship for us in our lives. And so really I would encourage us all to, when something comes up in our lives and it's hard for us, take a moment to breathe and meditate, set a timer for 5 minutes and sit with yourself before making a decision out of
mm,
like a place of, you know, habit or a place of fear and needing some type of comfort that's not really going to support you in the future because we're all worthy of love and support and care, and we give that all day long to each other. And it's really important that if the table turns, and even when it doesn't, just in our day to day, that's what it's about, to cultivate a daily practice, is so that in those moments we have these tools that are accessible for us, and to give that love and service and um, to ourselves, that
Mm.
care to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so important. I think you use the word tool, to have tools to navigate these times, because it is quite intense. And I feel many of us are being asked to, or, going through things, being asked to let go of certain ways of thinking or being or navigating the world, and finding a new way that is more aligned, with the energy of love and compassion and understanding. And like you said, if we don't have those tools or practices, it's easy to just get like swept up in the drama of it all, or react rather than like truly responding in a way that would be more supportive. So, yeah, it's so important. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes a level of self love and self care, and
Mhm.
that really we're all worthy of, but we have to have a willingness to, and of understanding our worthiness.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a big one for so many people. And even something I feel I'm still cultivating within myself. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like perhaps when life does throw us those things, it's because it's like, uh, do you still feel like you're worthy in this moment, like,
Right.
of love, of compassion, of still peace, even though if we make a mistake in our lives, like I'm not a perfect human. I continuously made a mistake yesterday, and I'm like, oh man, but all I can do is just tell the truth and love myself through it, and say, okay, God, like, or universe, creator, creation, like, uh I I still am worthy of love, and I'm open to this lesson that I'm being taught, you know?
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, that's such a big one too. And I love that you shared you made a mistake yesterday, because I did too. And I was exploring the concept of mistakes as miracles, unexpected miracles.
I hope
And
so.
perception shift. And it was actually very much Ram Dass related too, which is funny. I had a client, and there was, I use like a playlist for my breathwork sessions. And then all of a sudden, like my hand slipped and I accidentally hit play on this other song that I had never heard before, that like wasn't in the playlist, and it cut off the other song. And I was like, oh no, like that probably was disturbing for her. And turns out it was like this Ram Dass audio with music, and he was saying the exact words of just like the process that she had been having, and like calling in about like knowing who she truly is beyond like the mind and the old thoughts and the stories, and like being able to live life from a place of love rather than fear. And I was like, okay, like, are mistakes really mistakes, or are they just like divine happenings?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're open to being used for the greater good, like sometimes
Hmm.
things but it's also, yeah, there's so many sides to every conversation and topic.
It's
We could
true.
inspect the whole thing, but really, I do believe that the mistakes that we make, when we choose to have that perspective shift, then they do become miracles. But we could also take the other route and just go into like the self-pity and blame and shame, and play that game for a while. But really, it's like we know where that goes, so we may as well. Oh, that was something on the pilgrimage, is that or at least for me, I discovered that when in those moments of fear, and of doubt and of being my faith being tested, what I learned is that I always, or first, like the first, how do we say, like possibility is that it's the worst case scenario that could ever go down.
Mm.
And then, you know, but then I learned like, okay, so this is my mind that I've created, that the one possibility that could happen is the absolute worst. And then I started thinking, I'm like, okay, well, what about the other 10 billion possibilities that are, potential to also happen? And or just even the possibility of not everything, you know, not working out, but the possibility of it actually working out, and creating space for that to be a possibility too. Because I
Mm.
don't know, and so instead of thinking like, oh, I know and it's going to be bad, it's like, I don't know. And so I'm going to just keep going, and with having an openness to the possibility that it will work out. Because
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's just totally shifted like my life from that initial fear. And I think it's coming from like a place, as I was really tuning in with myself and really kind of just trying to figure out like, where is this coming from? I think like in the psyche, like it wants to protect us from like the unknown situations of, keeping us safe. and
Mhm.
And so it's like creates this scenario of the worst thing that could possibly happen to then keep us safe from doing that, because that's a potential. Sure. But then there's so many other possibilities that could also happen as well that will be amazing and better than we could imagine, and miraculous. And so when we put ourselves out there and move through that fear of that, that there's potential for it to not work out, but there's greater potential that it will, and even better than we can imagine. It
Yes.
it really just started to become like almost a game for me to keep one day at a time discovering like, okay,
Yeah.
how will this work out? What will the outcome be?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's so powerful to have that awareness of just rather than being like caught up in the fear, being able to witness it and then being like, oh, but also like this is possible, there's so many solutions that are possible also, rather than it not going well.
Yeah. So love and compassion towards all of us in our processes, and I pray that we recognize that, to not just fixate the one on the first outcome of it not working, or the first possibility that it will not work out, but allow spaciousness for the other possibilities where it will work out.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that, I think that just reminded me when we were talking about mistakes. It's like, you just don't know if you just continue following the thread and don't abandon it in those moments, just like abort the ship. You stay, you hang on, like, who knows?
Yeah, I'm so happy we're talking about this kind of perspective and what's possible, because I really feel that so many people would take greater leaps of faith in their life, if they had this perspective, like being able to hold both, being able to hold the awareness of the fear of, what might go wrong, but also holding the awareness of what could go right, and choosing to lean into that, and trust in that.
Absolutely. I mean, for anyone listening to this, like, let me tell you, I will be the first one to admit that I have absolute fear. It's not that I no longer have fear, still have
Mhm.
fear, but now I feel like by moving through that fear, I have strength and I have courage to continue embodying faith.
Mhm.
And and that's what faith is to continue moving through the fear. And so both are accessible to us, fear and faith. And it's really about like there's an idea about which wolf that we want to feed, you know? And I'm just
Mm.
choosing to like really continue to feed the wolf of faith and also acknowledge the wolf of fear, but not to overfeed it.
Yeah, I love that metaphor. It's so true. It's like, what do we choose to focus on? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I pray, I really do like without doing this pilgrimage, I don't know. I don't know if I would have discovered these levels and depths of the fear in the mind and the thoughts and the awareness that I have now. And I'm continuing to integrate in my life through this experience. But so I really encourage everyone to, if there's something that you want to do in your life, to do it. And but don't do it alone. Bring God in and ask for support.
Yes.
We're really not alone. And especially when we acknowledge that and we ask for our ancestors, our angels, and ascended masters, and guides, and gurus, and guardians, and, the cosmic force of creation to support us, we'll be supported.
Mm, yes, thank you for that. That is a really important reminder. Don't go alone, bring God with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I feel like that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Oh, it's been such a joy to talk with you, Danny. I love you.
I love you too. And I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that you have a website with like the information about what you just did. Would you mind sharing that and maybe also your social media?
Yeah, oops, the website is a little bit more challenging because it's like a large URL, but I could send it to you. But
Perfect.
otherwise, on my social media, which is my first name and last name, Elisabeth Dreshaj, that has a link to the website.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm so excited for this podcast and for, yeah, you're just witnessing you and in your soul journey in this life experience. And I love this conversation we just had. I feel totally juiced up.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Embracing the Mystery, and I hope you enjoyed. To stay connected, you can follow me on Instagram at Danny M. Rem, or follow and like my Facebook business page, Danny Rem Embracing the Mystery, where I share weekly live channelings, guided meditations, and content to help empower you to live an authentic and embodied soul-led life. You can also find the links to this information in the bio of this episode. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoyed.